Yeah, suffice it to say, we're going to have a lot to get into, and I'm excited for the answers that you're going to provide, just like a tribal council. Let's start at tribal council. Quite surprised to say, was your reaction to all the votes coming in? But talk to me about what was going through your head. Obviously, we'll talk about some of those tukus or other people that burned you along the way. But when you say "come on," is that more so an exasperated "come on"? Is it a like directed towards specific people?
I mean, I think it was just an exasperated come on. I think it was just like going into that night, I thought it was about 60% me, 40% Genevieve. And, it's just like, it's just the moment. If you place like a sports bet or something, right? And it's just, you have hope until you don't. And when, that last touchdown gets scored or that last goal gets scored and you're going to lose, it's just like, oh, come on. Like, it's the moment where you can't hope anymore. And it's the hope that kills you. And so it was the moment of like, my hope is gone. I know what's coming. Like, any hope I had coming into the night is now gone. And come on, So it wasn't directed at anybody specifically now.
The 60-40 surprises me a little bit because obviously a lot of your edit was about your confidence in the game, including in this episode. Now, you did say that you were a little paranoid as we sort of curtailed towards the end of that pre-tribal council sequence. So, like, what did you think? Did you think specific people were going to flip? Was it just a vibe around camp? Was it you praying to the survivor gods to give you the shot in the dark back in exchange for a portion of rice?
So I never would have played the shot in the dark. Keep your vote over everything. But I mean, I had days in advance, and I had a lot of confessionals where I was saying this, like on day 13, 14, 15, where I'm like, 9 is going to be my bottleneck. If I can make it through 9, I have multiple paths to the end that are crystal clear. But if I'm playing with as high caliber of players as I think I am, they will realize that and they will snipe me at 9. So going into that night, for days, I knew like this is my Super Bowl. This is where it gets decided what's going to happen in my game. So I mean, I was super paranoid the entire night, and the only thing that gave me hope was at round for 10. I was like, Genevieve made this huge move, and this is a bit of like a saving hand out here that I can have an excuse to throw it on somebody else. Because going into whatever day, I was like, if I go to 9 with 4 tukus, it's gonna be me. And I don't have anybody else that I can throw this on. There's nobody else I can make a convincing pitch that they deserve to go home over me. And so when Genevieve finally emerges and makes this huge move on Saul, I was like, oh my God, this is the person that I can finally throw it on. So that's where I went from like 75% I'm going home to like 60% I'm going home. And you see the whole episode, I'm pushing Genevieve. So I mean, I think that moment was, yeah, I'm pretty paranoid. If they know what they're doing out here, they're taking me out right now.
Yeah, so I mean, you talked about this actually in a secret scene last week about how you were a decoy name or your name was being thrown out the past couple rounds, and you sincerely say in confessional, like, I don't understand why that's the case. And obviously, we see eventually it does come for you in this vote. I mean, talk to me about that perception of you being regarded as like the biggest threat among the Tukus to a certain extent. And was this something you were trying to curtail as you were finding this out in the moment?
So there was this moment when Saul comes up to me and he goes, "Hey man, you need to chill out at tribal council." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like I'm not throwing anyone's name out at tribal. I'm not blowing up any plan. I'm just talking about like survivor philosophy. Like what do you mean?" And he was like, "All I'm saying is like you got to chill because you're giving good answers and it's freaking people out." And I was like, "Okay." And I didn't realize it until after that around camp, and you don't really see a lot of Gabe around camp life. But I was like this very goofy, like very spirited guy. Like I'm cracking jokes, I'm telling stories. Like, I'm not very quiet around camp. I'm always talking, but it's always like in good spirits and trying to make people laugh. And obviously we all have our individual strategic conversations. But I was one of like those high spirit guys, if you will. And then we get into tribal, and I start giving, these very elaborate answers to Jeff's questions. And I think it freaked people out because it was like, who is this guy? Like, this is not the guy that we're hanging out with at camp every single day. This is not the guy we're seeing every
Hmm.
single day. So clearly he's thinking about this game way deeper than he's letting on. And I think a lot of people kind of got a preview of what sitting with me at Final Tribal might look like at the tribal councils we were going to every night. So, and I didn't really think about this until after the game. But that is where I think a lot of my big threat level came from, was this switch that flipped at tribal council. And it was like, whoa, this guy's like speaking very elaborately, and he's giving very, complex statements on the philosophy of Survivor and how our game is being played. And if this dude has the ability to flip the switch like that, it's very unpredictable, and it's not something that I can prepare for if I'm sitting with him at the end. So I think that's where a lot of the threat level came from, and I didn't really think about that until the game was done.
Interesting. Well, you talk about, how if you made it past this vote, you had so many different pathways to the end. Let's talk about some of those people that maybe you would have sat next to. Of course, gotta start with Sue. I mean, when you and me were talking before, you had already kind of eyed her as someone that you wanted to work with, and you manifested it. It came to fruition here. And what I heard so much from TK, from Tiana, was like very specifically how on the DL your relationship with Sue was, and how close you were. So talk to me about this dynamic and how the two of you were able to honestly get away with being as close as you were.
Yeah, so I mean, day one, hour one, I went up to Sue, and that's where you see that scene in the first episode where I'm like, Sue, I bleeping got you. I got you. And from that moment on, it was like me and Sue were good. There was no conversation that needed to be had. There was no reassurance that you ever needed to do. And that's a very valuable thing in the game of Survivor, is to have an ally that you don't constantly have to check in with and constantly have to prove your trust to. Sue was with me from that very first conversation. So we didn't need to be talking to each other ever. I mean, it was awesome. And every time I talked to Sue, it was just like, hey, who are we voting for? This person? Okay, good. I got you. And every time Penn went to Parchment, it was constantly proven true that me and Sue were together. So I think that from an outside looking in, like, yeah, that relationship didn't exist, but all the trust was built within 3 or 4 conversations in the first 2 days that we were out there. So yeah, like TK and Tiana and everybody else, until we got pretty late in the game, like there was no reason for them to think that we were together, because we didn't talk to each other. That we never talked to each other outside of being in group settings. And then every once in a while, we would find like 3 to 5 minutes to just update each other on all the information that we had. And then we would go our separate ways again. It's one of the things I'm the most proud of in the game, is the relationship I had with Sue and how well we concealed it for how long.
Now let's talk about the other wounded bird in the nest in the form of Caroline, because yeah, this was a relationship from a one-on-one perspective we did not get as much insight into. So talk to me about your perspective on your dynamic, and what was your reaction to finding out that, she not only ends up voting against you, but like was legitimately contemplating it that afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, Caroline was a wounded bird that grew into a dragon. And I am so proud of her. And I think that her game is awesome. I think her taking me out was a great move for her game. And I think it was just so badass how she pulled it off, and the ruthlessness that she showed with it. It was awesome. And Caroline is just a badass player that deserves all the plaudits. But so you see me and Caroline having that conversation early on, where I'm like, hey, I want to work with you. And she's like, I don't really know if I trust you. And she tells me in that conversation, me and Sue, we know we are on the bottom. And if we go to tribal council, we are both playing our shots in the dark. And I was like, no. I was like, no, I want to get TK out desperately, but I can't do that if you two can't vote. So we have this 5-minute back and forth of me being like, please don't do that. And she's like, I'm going to do it. And then that's when I decide to show her the idol. And I show her the idol, and she looks at it, and she's pretty emotional at this point, just talking about being on the bottom. And she goes, this just sounds like something that somebody would say if they didn't want me to play my shot in the dark. And then I whip the idol out, and she goes, and she freezes, and I put it back, and she goes, let me see it again. And then I pull it out and I show it to her, and she goes, yeah, that's it. And early in those Tuku days, me and Caroline would just walk off, especially at night, for like 30 minutes to an hour at a time, and just vomit strategy back and forth to each other. And we really struggled to like personally connect with a lot of people in Tuku beyond like a surface level, nice to meet you. And having those strategy conversations, we were the only people that we could really do that with on Tuku. You know, we were the only people who really had that strategic mind at that level of complexity on Tuku. So being able to find somebody after a few days of thinking that person didn't exist and being able to talk to each other, for like I said, sometimes hours on end about just like our thoughts on the game, Survivor in general, our tribe, like what the merge might look like, how we would handle that. Those conversations got me and Caroline really, really, really close. And you saw how it carried all the way through the pre-merge into, the jury phase of the game.
Yeah, so let's talk about another phase of the Tuku equation, which of course is Kyle, the limo driver, who maybe drove your game off a cliff at the end here. I mean, talk to me about, again, your relationship, because it seems like you guys, as Kyle says last night, got really close the last couple days, but you were also kind of both wary of taking out the other one at a certain point. You were the only two guys that had one individual immunity through this post-merge up to this point. So talk to me about your relationship, and if Kyle doesn't four-peat it last night, were you thinking of getting rid of him sooner rather than later?
Yeah, if Kyle doesn't win, I think that's who the votes have to be pushed on. I think I still would have put feelers out for Genevieve. Like you heard me say in the episode, if I could choose, if I was the only vote, I would have taken out Genevieve and I would have kept Kyle in the game. But I think Kyle would have been the easiest sell that wasn't me. I knew the amount of Tukus left in the game was very worrying to people. And there wasn't much of a pitch for Caroline or Sue to go, but there was a huge pitch for Kyle to go. Now, was it a bigger pitch than me leaving? Who's to say? But I think if I said, hey, I want to vote Genevieve tonight, assuming Kyle's vulnerable, I want to vote Genevieve tonight, and everybody else was like, well, we want to vote Kyle, I would have been like, all right, then we're voting Kyle tonight, and it would have broken my heart. And there were many times on the island where I was by myself and I thought about writing Kyle's name down, and it made me well up a little bit just because I really did get close with them once we hit the merge, and that was one of my guys out there. But at that phase in the game, round 9, if everybody wanted to do Kyle, I would not have pushed back.
Last thing I got to ask is, again, I want to dig into these multiple pathways to the end, because I would imagine, sitting there with Caroline and Sue was probably your ideal outcome. But what other cross-tribal relationships were you seeding? Was there anyone else that was involved in your end game should the ideal happen and you make it through this final 9 vote?
So I like the idea of working with Teeny a lot. I don't think that I did proper damage control after the Saul vote, and I think that really rubbed Teeny the wrong way. And there was a moment where we were out there, and it was the morning after Saul gets voted out, and Teeny kind of comes up to me, knowing that I completely lied to her face at Tribe about who I was voting for. And Teeny goes, hey, Gabe, so about last night. And I go, Teeny, we've all moved on from that. It's cool. Don't even worry about it. And I walk away. And Teeny just kind of has this look on her face of like, oh, okay, I guess so. But like, that was kind of a F you. So now I'm going to say F you and vote you out. So I like the idea of working with Teeny. And I really like the idea of working with Sam. And me and Sam got along great. Like, he works in sports media. I had many years of working in sports media. We both just love, the game and competition and everything. So me and Sam would have these nights where we would just name the most random NFL and MLB players and just see like how long we could go back and forth for, just being like, Cadillac Williams, Chance Sisquo, Laquan Treadwell, just people nobody knows, but it's just fun to do. So me and Sam were really close on a personal level, but on a strategic level, we weren't. And I saw 2 pathways to the end after, assuming I go through round 9, is I either brute force my way with the Tukus and it's a Tuku Final Four and we, rip off the Reba 4, or I'm the Tuku that flips and we start picking off Tukus and I'm the first one across tribal lines. And I saw that as an equally viable option, if not more viable, the more I think about it, of getting to the end. So those were kind of the 2 plans I had laid out, and it was all going to come down to like who won immunity and what conversations I had after Genevieve went home. But that was about it. Either I brute force my way with the Tuku 4, or I'm the snake that flips on all of them, and I'm the first one to make that move, so nobody can make it on me.
Last question. Are you allowed in the state of Hawaii? Are you going to go on a vacation there anytime soon?
Oh my God! I mean, they take their time zones very seriously. You know, God forbid you make a joke about Hawaii's time zone. So next time I go there, I'll be sure to sleep on an Eastern time zone sleep schedule, and I won't mention that people in Hawaii wake up a little bit later than people on the East Coast. So aloha to all my Hawaiians out there.
Well, Gabe, thank you so much, as always, for everything you brought to this conversation. I mean, as Jeff said early on in the season, like this enthusiasm that you bring not only to this conversation but to 18 days out there was the mark of a new era player. Especially one that wants to put himself on the Mount Rushmore. And I know you already manifested a second time out there, but regardless, I'm so happy we got the chance to talk about time number one, not only before but today as well. It was awesome getting to talk with you as always, man.
No, this was great, man. And thank you so much for everything you do for this community. Seriously, you are one of the pillars that make this a great and fun community to be a part of. So thank you, man.
Oh man, the pleasure is all mine. Well, all the best to you and yours. Enjoy the rest of your time in Chicago as well, and looking forward to seeing what happens next with you, Gabe. You have a good one.
Can't wait to talk to you again.
Yep, have a good one. Bye bye.